Short answer, no. Long answer, no. But you might wonder, if the answer to that question is so simple and straightforward, then what even is the point of this video? Well, while the answer itself is, again, pretty simple and straightforward, the discussion that leads to that answer is way more detailed, deep, and interesting, which is what I'm going to cover today. Now, as with any argument, there are obviously people who make it in good faith and people who make it in bad faith. The bad faith argument for the implementation of male students in Blue Archive is the usual tourist bullshit. It's simply a way for them to mock or make fun of, or an excuse for them to criticize the original fan base or the game or the devs, right? They don't actually believe that implementing male students would make the game better or improve their enjoyment. They just make this argument as an excuse to be annoying to people they don't like. So those people obviously can be very easily dismissed, especially due to the fact that if the positions were switched, they would absolutely not hesitate in dismissing your arguments. So why should we extend a courtesy to them that they would not even think about giving to us? However, there are people who argue this in good faith. Now, what is the good faith way to make the argument that Blue Archive should implement male students? Well, it's the argument of inclusivity. Now, inclusivity has been getting a bad rap recently, and deservedly so, unfortunately. But I think that the reason they have been getting such a bad rap is not due to the concept of inclusivity itself, but due to how it's implemented. As when you hear a work announce that it's going to try to be more inclusive or adopt more modern sensibilities or try to bring new people into the fan base, they don't do so by adding more interesting things that new fans might enjoy. They do so by removing shit that the original fans already liked, but that was too problematic or too controversial or edgy or offensive in order for the work to not drive people away, right? And so the philosophy that they adopt is that there are already a lot of people who are interested in the product, but that simply don't get into it due to those barriers. And so what they need to do is remove those barriers instead of adding things that would probably bring more people to the product, things that would work as attractives to a new audience. A philosophy that, as we've seen, is very mixed in terms of like actually achieving their goals. However, the kind of inclusivity that is proposed by the people who make this argument is exactly the opposite. By their logic, or at least by the logic of most people I saw making this argument in good faith, we would not remove or censor or alter in any way characters like Aru or Rappy or like Z23 from Azure Lane. We would keep all these characters and simply add on top of the characters that already exist cool, interesting, and of course also very attractive male characters. So male Nikkeis to Nikkei, for example, or turning some of the boats in Azure Lane into men instead of women, or some making some male T dolls, or making some of the horses in like Uma Musume Pretty Derby, boys instead of being it all girls. Like if a horse is male in real life, translated to a male like character, and if a horse is female, translated to a female character. And that version of the argument for inclusivity is way more difficult, at least for me, to counter. Not only because, to some extent, I defended, agreed, and still do even today, but because it has none of the real downsides that generally come with inclusivity that make it such a bad word to a lot of people. Like in this version of the argument, nothing would really be lost. Like Aru would still get to keep being her sexy, cute, dorky, adorable self that the original male fans already enjoy, and we could have some very handsome but also very awkward and dorky male students that would provide the same appeal to like women or LGBTQ people. So it would be a way for Blue Archive or various other games to preserve their original audience while also including even more people into the fan base, into the hobby, into the community, which at least to me just sounds like a win-win, right? You lose nothing and you gain everything, both on a community and on a financial level. So why not? Why was the initial answer of this video a resounding no? Why, again, not implement such a seemingly perfect form of inclusivity into your product? Well, while I could use the try, true, and easy community argument and simply compare the amount of like internal controversies that happen in communities that already do this, because one of the other reasons why it is so difficult to oppose this argument is not only because it's good in theory, but because it was already implemented in a lot of gacha games to resounding success, both in general and in attracting a more balanced audience in terms of the gender distribution. Like you have examples from the more male dominated but still with a way more substantial female audience than all those other games I mentioned up until this point, Fate Grand Order and Grand Blue Fantasy, two more balanced experiences that, for the most part, have a 50-50 split, or at least close to it from what I've seen, like Arc Knights or Limbus Company, as well as Hoyo Versus games like Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail. And Honkai Star Rail is a pretty good example too, because a lot of people might argue, oh, but all these other games, they already started with this like more mixed appeal, right? Simply implementing that into a game that already has a more exclusive appeal wouldn't work. And games like FGO or especially Honkai Star Rail are good examples of why that isn't true. Because FGO started off very much only appealing to a male audience. And while it mostly still does appeal to a male audience a lot more than to a female audience even today, they do have a lot of events, characters, and just overall features that are clearly meant to appeal more to a female audience or an LGBT audience than they did at the start of the game. And Honkai Star Rail pretty much achieved a perfect 50-50 audience split after pretty much starting as a female character only game. It started with Honkai Impact III and progressed both in its spiritual sequel Genshin Impact and its more direct in-universe sequel in the form of Honkai Star Rail into games with more mixed appeals. which both were very successful at not only achieving for themselves but attracting a more split audience that was not there for the first game. So it serves as a really good argument not only for games to start out this way, start out with a mixed appeal, but why they should, even if they started with a more exclusive appeal, transition into a more inclusive appeal. So the idea both sounds good in theory and has already been implemented to resounding success in real life. So, in face of all of this, why exactly do I still oppose it? Why do I still think that Blue Archive and similar games should not implement male playable characters? And ironically, the game that best proves my point, that best proves why they shouldn't, is a game that appeals exclusively or almost exclusively to women, which is Love and Deep Space. You see, while other games have been able to attract a more significant female audience by implementing a, an appeal to them alongside the usual male appeal, Love and Deep Space instead decided to go full in on the female appeal and do its best to appeal not only exclusively but in the best way to women specifically, both by the usual ways of implementing attractive and very, well, extremely sexualized, in fact, male characters, but also in features that which pretty much were implemented exclusively with women in mind, such as the infamous period tracker. And not only did pretty much every girl in the gacha community I've seen like flock to that game, like either transition into playing that game or started playing it alongside their usual other gachas, but that game also attracted its own fan base almost exclusively of women. A lot of women who were not at all interested, even in some games that included female appeal, like women that were not interested in any type of gacha game at all, were attracted to play that one. And that's because no matter the way you try to implement it, inclusivity of any way is going to, at some level, worsen the experience for everyone. It may include more people, but they won't have as good of an experience as they would with a more specialized product. Now, what do I mean? Well, as Love and Deep Space proves, a lot of women not only want something that's appealing to them, but something that is deeply appealing to them, something that truly has them in mind and tries to provide the best experience possible for them. And that unfortunately means not only including things that are appealing, but also excluding things that are unappealing. One of the reasons why so many women who have never been interested in gacha games before are interested in Love in Deep Space is exactly because not only does it appeal to them in not only the usual but in a deeper way as well, but because it has none of the things that generally take away from their experience. As Love and Deep Space has a lot of half naked men, but absolutely no half naked woman. In fact, it has no woman at all besides the protagonist. And that is because, while, in my opinion, the approach to inclusivity of putting in more appealing points instead of taking away more controversial points is better, in reality, if you truly want to appeal to an audience in the best way possible, you have to unfortunately do both. And the reason more inclusive games don't do both is because then they would be exclusive games. There's no way for you to both implement a bunch of really appealing things to a certain audience as well as to take away a lot of things that that audience considers unappealing without pretty much making a specialized exclusive product like Love and Deep Space or any of the games I mentioned before. And that not only works for sexual appeal, by the way, but it's the main argument that, for example, the Dark Souls fans use as to why they shouldn't implement difficulty options. Because by making the game difficult by nature, they can make it difficult in more creative ways, in ways that interact with each other and that provide a more specialized and way more appealing experience to the people who truly want a sense of challenge instead of something more half-assed that is designed to appeal to a broad audience. Because while difficulty options, in theory, should allow both people who want an easier experience and people who want a harder experience to both enjoy the game, the reality is that with a difficulty option, you have to make a lot of design decisions that allow both of these to be implemented. And what this translates into is, in most cases, making it so the difficulty options only affect superficial parts of the game instead of more deeper aspects. So when you put in a more difficult option, you essentially just turn the enemy spongier and make it so you take an absurd amount of damage instead of doing something actually interesting and creative, putting in a more interesting form of difficulty. And the same thing is true when you implement a more inclusive form of appeal. Like something like Genshin Impact, one of the big reasons it gets so many controversies is because while the female audience is trying to enjoy the super cute, fun, and interesting reverse heroine experience with all these hot guys, all these women keep appearing on screen pretty much half naked, which takes away from their experience. And while some people, the majority of people from what I've seen, can still enjoy an experience with some flaws due to its good points, a lot of people would prefer a more specialized experience that just truly appeals to them with no downsides. And that is the experience that more exclusive games like Love and Deep Space to women and Blue Archive, Nikkei, Azure Lane, and various others provide to men. As I said, there is nothing wrong with a game trying to be more inclusive. There is a time and a place and appeal to those games that try a mixed appeal as well. And there's nothing wrong with a game starting out with one appeal and transitioning to another if they see that it meshes well with their product. And that occurs not only in one direction, in the direction of a more exclusive to a more inclusive appeal, but also in the opposite. Famously, games like Snowbreak Containment Zone tried to have a more general appeal. They only had female characters, but those female characters were not heavily sexualized at the beginning in order to both appeal to men but make the game more comfortable for women and LGBTQ people to enjoy. And that appeal did not work out for them, so they went with a more usual exclusive appeal and tried to up the male fantasy in various ways as much as possible, and that worked out pretty well for them. And that is, at the end of the day, why neither Blue Archive, Nikkei, Azure Lane, Girls Frontline, or various other games that have exclusive appeals should necessarily try to make themselves more inclusive. They can, and it may even work, but there isn't a real need for them to do that. as both those types of more exclusive games as well as more inclusive games both have their time, place, and appeal to them, and both deserve to exist. There is no need for any game really to change whatever its appeal may be in order to be more or less inclusive or to add this or that. Products are and should be allowed to be different exactly because that's how we truly can appeal to as many people as possible, by having as many products of as many types with as many appeals as possible, in order that while not everything is going to be for everyone, there will be something for everyone to enjoy. And as a bonus, one thing I unfortunately don't see tackled in discussions like this is the perspective of the creators. Because a lot of people act like the audience is the only one important or the only one having fun. So, for example, a lot of people lament, oh, those poor artists, they're forced to draw those disgusting NFSW pictures that they didn't want to just in order to survive. Like, of course, there are artists that do feel like discouraged or do feel like disgusted or tempted to draw these things exclusively for money. This isn't something that never happens, obviously, but for the most part, from what I've seen, most erotic artists have either no issue drawing what they draw or they even enjoy it. And that's also true of the creators of these games. If you see the people who make Blue Archive or Nikkei or anything in discussions, they will see that they truly love making characters of the appeal that they chose to implement for their game. It's unfortunately a very alien concept right now with the current Westerns industry, but in more Asian led games, generally the people working on the game are people who are, shocker, fans of that kind of game who were inspired to make something similar. And so it's entirely possible that it may even be something of the creators themselves as well. A lot of times, the reason why creators don't make inclusive appeals, they don't make something that may even benefit their game in ways that benefited other games, is because they are still people and have their own perspective. A lot of times it's not just a fan base that wants exclusively male or female characters or one or other appeal, but the creators themselves who equally like these things and want to keep making more of them instead of more things that may appeal to other people, people who aren't them. And that's a perspective that, again, it's not very much taken into consideration, but that I very much think it's important to consider in discussions like this, which is why I wanted to include it as an argument, even if a bonus one. But with that, that will be it for this video. If you liked it, please draw the normal YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, etc. And I do hope to see you next time as always. If you particularly like this video, please also remember to either join the membership in one of the various levels I set up, or if you want to make more of a one-time donation, the paid comment system is also available to you. And I'd be really grateful if you could spare like any cent to me. Like, it's not necessary, obviously, but I legitimately would be very thankful. But yeah, I think this will be it for now. Once again, thank you for watching, and for now, I bid you all farewell. Obscure Anime out!